Welcome to the Bowling University studio from the International Bowling Campus in Arlington, Texas. I'm John Karabatsis, and I'll be your host for this edition of the Bowling University Profit Break. Thank you for joining us. Our mission here at the university is to enrich people's lives personally and professionally, and the Profit Break is an opportunity for sharing insights on how to grow revenue, reduce costs, enrich yourself, your team, and your business. Welcome to our first-time viewers, and welcome back to those rejoining us. Give us 15 minutes, and you will be on your way to improving your profitability. You know, a profitable food and beverage operation requires consistent execution along with creating and implementing systems. One of the most impactful systems to achieving profitability is inventory, which is often easier said than done given our current labor challenges. Our guest today is Bo Bryant, also known as the Restaurant Giant. Bo has over 30 years in the restaurant business as an owner, concept developer, author, and consultant to some of the most gifted and growing concepts today. Some of you may remember Bo from his Bowl Expo session. Bo today is going to share his insight into not only why inventory is important, but some strategies on how to do it effectively. Bo, welcome back. Great to see you again.
Hey, great to be back. Thanks for having me once again.
So this is really an important topic for our members. You know, what's the best way? You know, why do it? Why is it important? And what's the best way to do it? It's always a challenge that they face. So, in your experience, what do you see as best practices in managing inventory?
You know, that's a great question, but you leaked in a little question right there in the beginning is why do you do it? Mm-hmm. I'm going to jump back to that one first and answer that question.
It's your show. Go for it. Yeah.
Really quick. Because this is a piece I think that a lot of people don't necessarily understand. A lot of operators, myself included, have this proclivity to lean towards the art. We really like the craft part of the food and the drink. We like the engagement with the guests. We're kind of outgoing. We tend to kind of run away from the spreadsheets and the numbers and the paperwork. So if there was ever a compelling argument for why this is so critical, it is, and so this was out of a report from a national ops report from the NRA, and Deloitte they do this biannual report and they study a bunch of stuff. What they had found was concepts that manage their inventory, that count it, and that look at their ideal cost versus their theoretical cost or actual cost, ones that measure that typically live within about a 3% variance between what they should be at versus where they are in profitability. Concepts and brands that don't manage inventory tend to suffer from a 9% variance gap between their ideal and their actual cost controls. That's 9 points to the bottom that's not getting there. That's a big, big deal. So sorry to jump behind and get to that kind of first little question you just buried in there, but hopefully that creates a compelling reason why everybody should pay attention to this conversation. Now, the question that you asked preceding that was, what's the number one recommendation for maintaining profitability? Was that? No, let me see. What do I see as the best practice?
The best practices for managing your inventory, yeah.
Yeah, I think it begins with the accounting practice and establishing a kind of a best practice around the framework for accounting on inventory value. And so this one is disruptive and a little bit heavy, excuse me, but I'm going to explain it real quick because it's one of the most important things. In science, when you're doing any type of measurement or comparison, you want to manage or create what's called a controlled environment. And unfortunately, the world doesn't deliver that to us in the restaurant industry, so we have to kind of make some edits. If you look at the calendar, obviously 365 days, that's a prime number. That's not a good start. We work on 7 days a week. We know that Friday and Saturday every week is going to be busier than Monday, Tuesday, but we're kind of stuck in the calendar year. So when you look at the biggest, most sophisticated brands, one of the very first things that they do to curtail this is they manage a 28-day period, which is a 4-week period. So if you just throw out the calendar and start by building, those 28-day periods, that's all you're measuring at one time. The beauty of that is, call that your new month, a 28-day month. You can literally predict Monday through Sunday, 4 consecutive times in a row, what sales should be, what you're up against historically. And it's really one of the best practices, excuse me, as a measuring device and a great place to start. Otherwise, you can get really wonky on the accounting side if you're going anywhere from a 28-day month to a 31-day month. And the other big piece is when you look at a traditional food cost formula, you start with your beginning inventory and you add that to your total purchases. That total, then you subtract your ending inventory. That's the total product that you have purchased and sold. You divide that by your sales to calculate your food cost or your cost of goods. In that equation, when you're not on a 28-day cycle, that can mess up everything, right? There are months when you're working on a traditional calendar month where you could have 5 weekends or 5 Saturdays, and there are months where you could only have 4. So that disruptive part of it can really skew things and give us a false standard. It's also easier to manage that on-hand value over a 28-day period and set what your on-hand value should be so that when you take on-hand beginning plus purchases minus ending on-hand, you get more of an evened kind of anchor on each side. Then I know that was really heady. Sorry, I probably didn't start this off by enticing anybody to want to watch the rest of it, but that's a real heavy answer, but it's a true one.
There's a lot to unpack there. You're right. I think what caught my attention early on when you talk about a 9% variance, so just to keep it simple, because math can be hard, as an operator, I can just take 9% of my revenue and say potentially that's how much I'm losing. Or at least the 6% difference between the 3% and the 9%, that's how much I'm potentially losing by not doing an inventory. Did I understand that right?
Yeah, and I think if nothing else, hopefully this will evoke an opportunity to have a conversation with your accountant. Can we look at why we wouldn't stack this on a 28-day period versus a calendar month and get their feedback? That to me, at least, it's awareness creates change, right? That's my number one rule. And this at least starts to open the conversation.
Yeah. No, those are all great points, and I love keeping it simple. Building those systems, keeping it simple, maybe on those 4-week months, so you've got some consistency, you've got some predictability. When you think about it, it's like it makes sense. It makes sense, and you need that predictability. I also love your comment about the artistic part of it. A lot of our owners are not necessarily those detail accountant people. You need that person on your staff or on your team so you can focus on what you do best, let them focus on those details. So no, that was a great answer, Bo. Thank you for that very much. As you go around and you work with the different ones, are there any misconceptions out there about inventory that you find? What's the most common misconception about inventory that you find in working with your customers?
I think, boy, that's a loaded question. And a great question. I think number one is that this idea of a 30% food cost is good. It really depends on the concept type, and it also depends on your burden of labor. 30% might be great for one concept. If you're buying everything pre-made and it's just boil in a bag or throw in the microwave or heat it up on the grill, and there's not a huge production burden, you're going to drive or run a really low labor cost. So I think people divorcing themselves on the numbers instead of focusing on the prime cost is probably the number one misconception. Just assuming that 30% is good because you heard that somewhere, that may not necessarily be good. We've owned pizza concepts, and from the dough to shredding the cheese and all the labor that goes into the product, people get falsely excited over how low the food cost is in a pizza concept where you're doing everything from scratch because we're running 22, 24% food cost. They're like, oh, that's amazing. I want to get into that business. But then they look at it, especially with the labor impact and the wage piece right now. You run a 35% food cost, or 35% labor cost. All of a sudden, your prime cost doesn't look that great. So it's really important to understand what your plate cost is on every item and to find the aggregate theoretical food cost that all of that in total should equal, using that as a baseline. Then when you do your exercise of beginning inventory plus purchases minus ending divided by sales, that's actual. When you can compare what it should be to what it came out as, that's when the alarm bells start to sound and say, okay, we better dive into this and get good at it because that variance is untenable.
So know your brand, okay? Know what your cost should be, know what your goals are, and yeah, don't go with those just, well, 30% is a good cost. That's great advice. So know what you're all about. Now, talk a little bit about the practice of actually counting an inventory. Do you have any inventory hacks you can share with us from your experience that would help, speed up that process or make it more efficient?
Absolutely. We have, there's 2 good hacks I would leave you with that I have found reduce the burden of inventory as far as a time suck. So the number one that I'd stumbled upon a handful of years ago that I love to share with people is on my line count. So just about every restaurant has a make line, right? You open up your lids and you've got all your 3rd pans, 9th pans, 6th pans, you've got all your stock down below. So what we do is we create a recipe of the line. So everything on the line gets written in a spreadsheet. If it was full, right, this 3rd pan of cheddar cheese at 9 cents an ounce times the 80 ounces that fits in it times 12 cents an ounce, whatever it is, here's the total. And we go down a whole entire recipe card and we have a line recipe total. Before we do inventory, we fill the entire line. And then we just have one item that we count, one full line. And it gives us an equal cost on that line because it's built out as a recipe. Because I find a lot of people won't count their line, or they'll guess on their line, or they'll just put some silly value on it. But if you're taking inventory on a Friday, because you're doing inventory on a calendar month instead of a 28-day period, your line might be completely depleted. You still count it at a $1,000 value. But then on the inverse, you're taking it on a Monday and it's completely stocked. You're still giving it the same value, but it's actually different. So that's one silly little hack, but it's actually pretty impactful. A more simple hack is to invest the time, the first time that you take inventory, to actually go through and change your counting from just alphabetical, or however if you're using an order guide from a vendor, change it to what we call sheet to shelf, so that the first item on the list is the first item I see on the shelf in dry storage, and the second, and so on and so forth. Same with the walk-in, same with the freezer, same with the line. It's a little bit of investment in time once to put that in a sheet shelf sequence, but then every time you go to count after that, it is so much more fluid and fast. You're not hunting and pecking for every single item wherever it's located.
That is great advice. Consistency, take the time up front, set it up properly, and then just execute on that monthly basis, how often you do it. So, you know what, Bo, I think you've managed to, with this episode, to make this one that if I'm going to watch this, I'm going to stop it, I'm going to rewind it, and I'm going to listen again, because you've covered so much in such a short amount of time. So very insightful thing. So I know you're an author, as I mentioned early on, and you have several books. So we have time for one last question. Is there any of the books that you've written that may address inventory? One book better than another?
So in this particular case, as much as I would love to shamelessly self-promote, I would actually defer, if it's okay. So I host a free YouTube page with a whole bunch of deep, in-depth content. As you're stopping and pausing this video, if you wanted to go to my YouTube page or even through my website, yep, right there, bobryant.com, there is Food Cost 101. There's some really in-depth kind of masterclass courses that I just post for free, just try to help the industry get better and make operators more profitable. No strings attached, great place to go and dive into this even deeper. And I think my food cost video that I posted and didn't tell anybody about has somewhere north of like 250,000 views.
Wow.
That's nothing I've even promoted. So I know that people like that content and want to dive in and learn more about it. That's a lot easier to digest. It's longer, but in a 15-minute video, they don't have to pause and go back as much. That would be my recommendation.
Right. Thank you for sharing that with us. That's great. That's great. Well, Bo, thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to share your knowledge with us today. I really appreciate your time. Okay.
Thanks for having me.
So if you'd like to learn more about inventory and improving your food and beverage operation, you can connect with Bo at bobryant.com. or Bo at bobryant.com, or by visiting his website, bobryant.com. As we wrap up another edition of the Bowling University Profit Break, remember that when your focus is on growing people, people will grow your business. We look forward to seeing you next time for another great episode. If you have any questions about today's show or would like additional information, you can reach us anytime at education@bpaa.com. Also, you and your team can watch any of our previous episodes 24/7 by visiting bowlinguniversity.net. The Profit Break is now available when you want it, and we have new episodes premiering every month. Until then, I'm John Karabatsos, reminding you to do for one what you wish you could do for everyone. We'll see you next time.